Do we need to do anything special to start in here, Nabil, or are we just getting started?
I think we'll just get started.
Let's do it.
This is something. Our start is something we'll have to refine as time goes on.
Yeah. Welcome back to Talking Real, brought to you by the Oklahoma Association of Realtors. This is episode 172 of Talking Real, where we're going to talk about all kinds of things that are happening. Nabil, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I've got this newfound energy. You know, we're just chugging along.
You're just feeling good about it.
Feeling good about it.
Excellent. Me too. I'm feeling rested and great.
That's
and
good.
ready to talk about some stuff.
That's the best time to talk about stuff.
Yes.
And that's what this episode is. It's a conglomeration of news and happenings that are happening right now.
Absolutely. So, we don't like to leave a week without an episode if we can keep from it. And I'm out of state on vacation, but we're still bringing an episode, right? This is what we do. Nabil's been out, and we still bring episodes. It's just the thing that we do.
Yeah, I totally forgot that you were actually further away than you usually are.
Yeah. I'm out in Florida on a little family vacation, but always make time for Talking Real.
I love it.
It's the highlight of my week. So we've just got a handful of things we want to talk about today, just some updates and news stories, those kinds of things that we think may be interesting to know. Just some things heading this way as well. So we wanted to start out by talking about the National Association of Realtors and Department of Justice settlement agreement. I don't think we've had a chance to talk about it on the podcast yet, and wanted to at least bring what those changes that are coming down the pipeline are, just so everybody can kind of be aware. A lot of people have probably heard about them so far. I mean, at some point, you've probably heard about this settlement and some of the changes, mainly to MLS rules, but also to a couple other things on how you can advertise. Those kinds of things are coming in. So some changes to the Code of Ethics.
Yeah, so let's get into it. These are always interesting to see how they're responding to the market, right? Because that comes from something that stemmed from what was happening in the market.
Yeah. So, sort of just a real quick backstory. We're not going to go into a lot of detail on it, but the Department of Justice was investigating the Realtor Association, MLS rules, Code of Ethics, and they filed a lawsuit against the Realtor Association, but there's also simultaneously was a proposed settlement agreement on how to settle all the issues that have at least in principle been worked out with the Realtor Association. Now it's got to go through a whole process. I don't recall if we've had our national board of directors approve these yet or not, but that's a step that has to happen. I think Department of Justice has already approved them, but then the court has to approve them as well. And, this isn't an admission of guilt. This isn't, in fact, the Realtor Association has disagreed with the Department of Justice characterization of some of our rules, but nevertheless, in order to settle things and move on, there's a handful of changes that are going to come down the pipeline that everybody needs to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
So just to kind of get into these, the first thing that needs to be kind of focused on is the change to how compensation is listed publicly. So right now, if somebody goes to realtor.com, for example, or to an IDX feed on a realtor's website, that's not going to show the compensation that's offered to the buyer's realtor, right? So that commission that's offered by the listing broker isn't going to show up, but that's one of the changes that's going to have to happen. That compensation offered to co-broke that transaction, so to the other broker, the buyer's broker, that's going to have to now be publicly listed so that anybody can view that. Again, just providing more information to the public. No real harm in that. That's just some changes on what's going to be publicly displayed through MLS feeds. So your MLS is almost certainly aware of this and maybe has already even made the change. A lot of MLS has jumped out there and went ahead and made the change. So that's kind of the one of the big things that will be changing are those MLS data feeds showing what the offer of compensation is publicly.
I think that's an interesting change. I mean, I don't know if it won't make an impact of how business is done necessarily, but I think in that level of transparency, it's a very interesting change to see what compensation is offered where.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, more information. That's just kind of the world we're living in, for one thing. But
Mhm.
I don't know that there's going to be any real harm to this.
No, I
Seems to
mean,
me that
if anything, you'd be going in more knowledgeable, which is never really a bad thing.
yeah. So it's just kind of interesting. We'll see if it has any impact on how business is done, or if any actual buyers out there or sellers out there decide they want to change something as a result of it. It'll be kind of interesting to see, but I suspect probably not a huge impact. But again, more information out there.
Yeah, yeah, and just a random thought that came to mind. I wonder if, and probably not, but I wonder if, a realtor is um, trying to decide which to go with. Maybe they might go with the higher one, but I don't think that would be it because the client is the one that's really going to be picking those properties that they want to look at and see and stuff. So,
Yeah, and that's actually another part of this is that one of the ethical obligations that'll be required, and really it sort of already is an obligation, but
mhm,
it reaffirms that brokerages have to provide consumers with all the properties that fit their criteria, regardless of the compensation offered or the name of the listing brokerage. So you won't be able to sort listings by the compensation that's offered. You won't be able to sort listings by who the listing brokerage is. And it's important for everybody to remember that even if somebody's offering $1 of compensation, if that house fits the criteria for your buyers, you still have to show them that house if they want to. You've still got to send it to them. You can't exclude those. That's not your decision to make. That's the buyer's decision to make.
mhm.
And this goes into why you should use buyer brokers agreements, having that conversation of we'll try to negotiate the commission, but remember, if they're not going to offer any commission or insufficient commission, then it comes down to the buyer to pay for those services. And so that's something that we'll see a little bit more of. I hear people say, well, I'm entitled to X commission, and that's just simply not true. It's whatever the listing broker offers is what you're entitled to for that particular transaction. You can try to renegotiate that commission if you want to, or have that buyer brokers agreement that will have the buyer chipping in to pay for those services. So that's kind of how
Right,
that's going to have to be done.
right. Kind of like any other business, it's dictated by the market,
Yep, absolutely.
and that's exactly what this is doing.
And if anything, right now we're seeing a pretty interesting time in the market. So that will ebb and flow and fluctuate as time goes on. So we'll see how that develops.
Hmm.
The next thing is there's going to be a more specific statement in the Code of Ethics that specifically says buyer agents cannot represent that their services are free to clients. So you can't tell a buyer or prospective buyer that your services are free. When you have an expectation of compensation from some party, then you can't say it's free because you're still getting paid. Instead, you will have to explain how you expect to be paid. And while that's typically from cooperative compensation from the listing broker, you're not going to be able to say that you um, offer your services free to buyers, because that's, again, you're going to have to be more specific about where that compensation comes from, instead of making it sound like you're not getting paid or your services are truly free, when at the end of the day, the buyers are bringing money, and some of that money would potentially be coming back to you as compensation. So, the DOJ kind of takes the position that's not free.
Right, and makes sense. It's free for someone, but your services themselves aren't free. You're getting some sort of, like you said, some compensation for it, something in return for your time and work,
Yep,
which is why
absolutely.
most people spend their time and work. So,
Yes, exactly. It's not a charitable real estate brokerage. It's
Am-
for compensation.
it's just voluntary.
Yeah.
Everyone's just out there to help.
Right, right. The last change that we're going to talk about is that, and this is a pretty big one. Right now, the only people who are really entitled to access a property that you have listed are participants in the MLS that you subscribe to. And that is something that is going to change. Part of the agreement is that all licensed real estate agents in the state will have access to the lock boxes even if they are not a participant in your MLS. That does not mean you have to offer them the same compensation. I mean, the offer of compensation, that whole thing is still the same, that it's binding with respect to members of your MLS. So you can negotiate a different commission, those kinds of things. But you are going to have to provide access. Again, the MLSs are aware of this. I'm pretty sure all of them in Oklahoma, at least, have the ability to give someone a temporary code, whether that's through an app, or some of the lock boxes have codes directly on the boxes, those kinds of things. But
Hmm.
that's kind of a big change, is that anybody, regardless of whether they're a participant in your MLS or not, as if they have a real estate license and they request to show that property, there's going to have to be a process to give them access, one way or the other. And there's different ways that you can accommodate that, whether you're present or whatever. But that's something that's going to have to change. Is you won't be able to say, no, you're not a participant in my MLS, I'm not going to give you access.
Right. And I mean, from your perspective, why do you think that little tweak was made?
I think one of the things the DOJ has done in some other industries is they have a concern for people who are licensed in that state, but then there's some other body that's trying to get what they consider an unfair competitive advantage, or what would essentially like a boycott to some degree. So it's
Hmm.
anti-competitive. And so I suspect here the DOJ's position is that if you are not getting access to all licensed real estate agents in the state, whether they participate or not, that is your MLS then is engaging in some kind of anti-competitive behavior by essentially boycotting non-participants in the MLS by not allowing them to come help clients participate in in the market, those kinds of things. And so I think that's probably it. I hope nobody's thinking, well, then why would I want to be a member of the association or that MLS if I can just not pay dues and still have access? And the bottom line is, again, compensation. When you've got somebody in the MLS that is offering compensation, that is binding on other MLS participants. So if you bring a buyer to a property that is in your MLS and that listing agent's offering compensation, that's a binding contract between you two. You can enforce that, you can make that get paid. If you are not a participant in the MLS, you're going to have to work out a separate compensation agreement, because they don't owe you anything unless you have a separate compensation agreement. So that in and of itself is a pretty darn good reason to keep participating in the MLS. Is if you're a buyer's agent, you want to get paid, the easiest way to get paid is to be a participant in that MLS. Because I have heard plenty of stories of people, even realtors, going to another MLS that's outside of their home MLS that they're not a participant in, and they get paid less, maybe sometimes a third or two-thirds or half of what may be offered to participants, and that's what they can work out through their compensation agreement. So that's just, I think, an important thing to remember, is that there's a good cooperative piece to that would, I think, be a good reason to stick around.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of safety for your business in a way. Your that contractual agreement is taken care of, which is nice.
Yeah, on top of the myriad other really good reasons
Right.
to be a realtor. I mean,
Right.
that's just that's just one that sort of is directly on point to this MLS issue
Yeah.
and showing properties and those kinds of things. But obviously, there's a whole heck of a lot of other good reasons to be a realtor. Let's not discount those either. Don't
Right.
mistake me for saying that's the only reason to be a realtor. By all means, we know that's not the case. So,
Yeah, well, you
but
get
yeah, it's
access to
just
Jeff, it's
exactly just sort of some of the things I've heard in response to these rules, I guess, addressing that. So, again, this is all still kind of in development and processing. Again, you may have already seen some of these changes, but again, we got to go ahead and start implementing those as this develops. And yeah, we'll keep you apprised of any other developments that come up on that front, but wanted to at least have a little refresher on what you may have heard about that settlement.
nice. That's um going to be interesting. I mean, do you think any of this, when it actually shakes out, is they're going to tweak it and change it, or do you think this is exactly how they're going to try to implement it?
I suspect this is what it will be in these types of cases. This in principle was worked out between NAR and DOJ before DOJ filed that lawsuit. They kind of had to do it that way. That's sort of just the way it works, is that they will negotiate confidentially before DOJ files a lawsuit. So this has been hashed out for a while. This is not necessarily a new thing. This has been going
Mm.
on. I don't know how long, but presumably for some time, this has been kind of in development. So I would be surprised if there were any major changes that came as a result of this. And I think this is all stuff that at the end of the day, we can live with, right? I mean, this isn't,
I mean,
it's not going to dramatically change the way things are done. Sure, do you have to give non-participants access to properties? Yes. Is that going to become a common thing? Maybe, but I doubt it. It's certainly possible, but I would be surprised. But we'll see. We'll see how it develops. But I
and
think it'll probably stick like this.
yeah, and in a way, I mean, that's good, right? Because they're bringing in more business. Why
Yeah, I
wouldn't
mean,
you want another person looking at the property?
right. I mean, at the end of the day, like, we're trying to sell properties, and
Right.
you
And
know,
that's best for your clients.
yeah, and of course, you want to sell it to another, somebody, a realtor representing the other side, because then that they have to comply with the code of ethics, and there's an
Mhm.
enforcement mechanism for that, and so that is certainly ideal. But again, at the end of the day, we got to sell properties for clients and those kinds of things. So, yeah, but that's a little update there on what's going on there.
Yeah.
Nabil, what's next? You showed me something that is of no surprise to me.
Wait, which one are you talking about?
I'm talking the shortage of paint. Like, this is just crazy, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's a shortage of everything, and everything is really expensive right now.
It's just you come across that story and it's just like, of course, because why not?
Right,
Why wouldn't there be
right.
a paint shortage right now with all the other problems going on?
Yeah, yeah. Like, with everything. I mean, COVID-19 restrictions created a big shortage in any number of markets, labor markets and goods markets and
Mhm.
construction materials, those kinds of things. And then also that February winter storm that hit Oklahoma and Texas. And primarily Texas was an issue where a lot of raw materials to make paints are made in Texas and developed in Texas. And so Texas was shut down for a couple of weeks because, you know, we struggle when the snow and ice get that bad, but Texas really struggles. So they were shut down, really disrupted the supply chains, and man, it just takes forever for them to come back. So we're also having paint shortages on top of everything else. The price of lumber and the shortages
Mhm.
there. Concrete's an issue. Like, everything is an issue. Everything is an
Homes are
issue.
in shortage. Everything's just in shortage.
Absolutely. I've heard a few stories recently of builders who signed contracts, 8, 9 months ago to build houses that are now like really trying to back out of building them. One, because the prices of the goods to go into the house are so much more expensive when maybe they weren't 9 months ago when they signed this contract. But on top of that, they can sell the house for a lot more than what they're currently under contract for. So I've been seeing some of those issues popping up. So I hate to hear that if you're going through that. But hold them to the contract is all I'm going to say.
Yeah,
But
because I mean,
this
that's
is
why you
just
have a
one more thing
contract.
that, yeah, this is one more thing that goes into it is paint. It's drying up.
It's paint. Nah, I see what you did there. Nice.
Oh
Very nice.
goodness.
Well, yeah, they're
Yeah.
saying that the paint prices could increase up to 40%. So
Gosh.
that's yeah, I mean, it just goes to show how uh, fragile the supply chain is, right? Like
Yeah.
one disruption just like throws the rest of the system in disarray.
Yeah. It's
And
crazy.
and granted, this was a pretty severe disruption,
Yeah.
but it's like everything is so interdependent on the other that if one falls out of place, everything else suffers. Like industries that you didn't even think it would matter to, right? Like
Yeah.
everything.
In the time it takes for supply chains to bounce back, a 2 week shutdown for a snowstorm can cause months of backup in the supply chain. It's crazy to even think about how that works. But,
Hmm.
and it's funny because this article that we're looking at where this came from, there's like, links on the side to other articles. And what do they all say? Appliance, furniture shortages causing headaches. Builders reporting material shortages hit record high. Builders, affordability hinges on relief in material costs, right? And this just goes into that housing shortages. It's really hard to build a new house right now for anything that's even remotely affordable, because when the cost of the materials that go into it are increased by 40% for paint, for example, and it just gets really hard to buy to build a house,
Yeah.
So anyway, hoping some relief comes along the way soon for all these material shortages. So if you're dealing with that out there, we send you our best.
Hopefully you have some paint in your garage.
Yeah, exactly. Oh goodness.
This next one was kind of interesting. The last bit of news that we have was about drones, and I have always dreamed about having a drone. Eventually, I will. I've played with some before, and oh my gosh, they're so much fun.
See, I haven't even played with one yet. I remember I went out to this total aside here, but went out to play disc golf with a friend, and at our disc golf course there's this area with a bunch of very tall trees, but there's no underbrush or low limbs or anything like that. And there was a guy that had one of those drones that he had basically like VR goggles on, and so he got the drone point of view, and he was flying this thing. I swear it was like 80 miles an hour whipping in and out of these trees with the vision from the drone like over his eyes, like a VR headset, and he was flying this thing just whizzing it in and out of trees. It was crazy. It looked super fun.
That sounds like a ton of fun.
Right. So that's got nothing to do with anything other than it was really cool, and drones do a lot of cool stuff. And
well,
the development,
they've gotten super agile and really cool. Like they've gotten faster, they've gotten more agile. This is not a big noisy thing anymore.
Right.
It can do exactly what you were saying. Like it's whipping in and out at 80 miles an hour with, no fear of crashing the drone. Like that technology has come a long way real fast.
For sure. And, when drones first came out, it's kind of the Wild West. There really wasn't any regulation. And then FAA put a lot of regulation on it so that, it was kind of harder to get a drone and to not necessarily get it, but to fly it legally, those kinds of things. And the FAA has continued to develop those rules, which over time is going to allow greater use of the drones, but it's also more regulation. So it's like less restrictive, but it's also more regulation, if that makes sense. It's sort of like rolling some restrictions back and putting, how you go about doing it. And in particular, we're talking about mainly flying over people and flying at night. So those are some things that are really changing as far as the FAA's regulations go. And so it'll open up some options to start capturing aerial twilight photos and videos for the listings, where right now you may not be able to do that. So you can get like a really pretty sunset, those kinds of things that may be relevant or helpful in a listing photo, videos, those kinds of things.
So those two rules that Jeff just mentioned, the operations over people and the night rule, went into effect March 16th. So it's been a couple months, and that opens people up to take pictures at night and over people and all that great stuff. But then, like you were saying, they've eased the restrictions, but then they're also adding some, to really unify the rules. And so they're going to have a new remote identification rule, which doesn't go into effect until 2023. But basically, this means that while you're operating your drone over people, it requires your drone to transmit identifying information, almost like an airline, right? You know exactly who this drone belongs to and why it's there, as opposed to just a rogue drone on top of people. And this is so that they can maintain a sense of safety and accountability. Right. So in case there's the rogue drone doing dumb things, you're not the one that gets in trouble because you know whose drone it is.
Right. So it kind of transmits that information, identification information. It's like law enforcement, for example, so that, like I said, for that safety aspect, they know who it is. And I think a lot of the newer drones they're already starting to build that in because those drone companies know this is coming. So that's being built in. But remember that there are certain cases where you have to have, as a drone pilot, you've got to be certified and licensed by the FAA. And that goes back all the way to 2016, where they started implementing some of that. And so just be careful about that, to know, check with the FAA to know when and if you have to have a license and how all that works, and that it's up to date and all those kinds of things. Same thing if you hire somebody who operates a drone. They really recommend that you ask a couple of questions to that drone photographer,
At least a
just to
couple
make
before you
sure,
hire someone.
at least a couple of questions, and make sure that they have insurance coverage just in case there is a crash and damage or something. You don't want to be liable. You want to make sure that they are covered, and also to make sure they have a current up-to-date pilot certificate, and are covered under the FAA's guidelines to make sure they can operate that drone. That's something to be aware of. But if you're interested in drone piloting yourself, check that out. Get your license and go have some fun with the drone and take some photos and videos and all that.
Yep.
Man, covered a few things there that I hope everybody finds valuable and interesting. We'll put links to these things in the show notes so that you can check out a copy of everything that we've looked at. And also there's links to other articles and resources on drones, for example.
Or
so
in
you can kind
case
of
you want to dig further into the paint shortage.
What's more fun than watching paint dry is digging into the paint shortage.
Maybe it affects particular colors or shades. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm sure it does. So, good luck getting your paint out there, man, and stay drone safe. And again, just beware of those changes coming down the pipeline on the DOJ NAR settlement. And it also give you a little insight into maybe why some of the changes were done at your MLS, if that's already been done. So you can kind of be aware of everything that's going on, up to speed, and staying compliant.
And if you haven't done so yet, hit that subscribe button so you know when the next episode is out. And if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button on YouTube, because all of these will, maybe in a couple episodes, start be broadcasting live once we smooth out our initial opening like we talked about.
Yeah, we're still getting used to the new platform here. So we're always going to bring Talking Real to you via audio on all of your favorite podcast platforms, wherever you get your podcasts. But we're also going to bring our beautiful smiling faces, a face that is great for radio over here. We're going to bring that to you on video
We're
via
breaking
YouTube.
barriers.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be live streaming those so there can maybe some more interactions. So make sure you've liked our Facebook page, because they may be showing up there, and you have subscribed to our YouTube page so that they can show up there and you can interact and chat and ask questions while we are recording, because we would love for that to happen.
Yes.
So until next time, we'll see you next Tuesday on Talking Real.